Welcome to this tutorial series on working with the True32 Project Tracker Airtable template. In this first of a series of video tutorials, I will provide you with a 30,000-foot overview. This is an awesome app, but it takes some practice to master it, so I recommend you schedule some one-on-one time to learn the basics. Then we can move on to more advanced topics. It's better to have several sessions than have a baptism by fire, a single long multi-hour session. You can order consulting time from my website. Just come to bobobuckley.com and go to the store, and on the store the first two items are consulting on-site and online, and obviously for this you'd want to do online most likely, and then you can come in and literally schedule your time on the calendar. Of course it's loading right now, but it'll show you what's available and you can just click on a date and schedule your time and pay for that time, and then we'll have our online session on the scheduled date. So here at the main screen of the World Domination Cabinetry Project Tracker, I know I call it the True32 Project Tracker on the web store, but here we're just trying to have a little fun with it, and we've got some project names that aren't typical project names. But on the World Domination Cabinetry Project Tracker, you've got these tabs across the top, and so the way I want you to think of those is these are data sets. Each of these is a set of data, and then each of these individual lines are data for a particular project or item or thing. So most of what you'll do is here on the Projects tab. I prefer you to do all these other things for the most part from the Projects tab, and I'll show you how to do that after I kind of go through this overview. We'll actually enter a project in a future video tutorial. So here we've got a tab called Projects, and it lists the projects, and right now we're grouping them by the type of project they are. So you see we have a residential new construction, residential remodel, and commercial remodel, and you can group by any field you want to group by. That's just how we've chosen to do it for this view. And so you've got tabs and you've got views, and so you see a little pull down here for the view. And here we've got multiple views, and we'll kind of step through some of these. I'm not going to go through every one of them, but this is kind of your primary view for a project. And from here, if you're working on an individual project, you're either going to click on one of these plus signs. If it's a residential remodel, you're going to click on that plus sign to start a new project, or you're going to click on that one for a residential new construction, or you're going to click on this one for a commercial remodel. There may even be more types in here. Let's see. Yeah, we've got 4. We only got 3 types in here right now, so there's also commercial new construction that we don't have one of those right now. But as soon as you added one and chose that, then that next grouping would show up down here. But here, one of the things you really got to grasp fairly early on is this first field is the primary field. You can't delete it. Just know that if it has an FX right here, that you can't type in this field. That this field is a calculated field. It is based on something else you're answering. And so here we've got a status type field that has a checkbox. So when you get done with it, you check it off and say, hey, this job is complete. This is a status type field where you're actually using a list of items that you can choose from. So this is the statuses that we'll use later for our production capabilities, and these can be anything you want. You can add anything you want. So where it says find an option, if you type in something new that makes more sense for you, it'll add it to the list, and you may need to come and sort that. And again, we'll look at how to do that in a more advanced series, or we could do that on our one-on-one trainings. And then you might have a next step, and we'll see why that's there for some of the other pages that we'll be looking at. And then there's some links and all types of data here for this project. But once you've started a project, you want to load over it, and you'll see these arrows kind of at a diagonal. That's how you open a project to the form view. So this is called a grid view. We're looking at all of these projects at once, but we can look at this project by clicking on these diagonal arrows, and now we're looking at a form view of the same project, and everything that is a field in this grid view is now here and in the same order that they're in here. But this is how you'd actually enter a new job, is you'd come in and start answering these questions. So it's pretty straightforward on what you do, but a lot of the times, like when you click on this one, you're linking a company. You're actually going to this company's tab at that time, and you're adding a company without going to the tab. You're going to do it here. And the same thing for contact. You're going to be picking someone from this contacts tab when you link to it. So for this one, we've picked a company or builder or remodeler by the name of Princess Bride Enterprises, and the builder himself, the person, the contact, is Dread Pirate Roberts. And then this jobs category that we saw earlier and how they're being grouped is here. And then we're linking our rooms, and so we would add each room here, and then we have a project manager, a kickoff date, and a due date, and then these things kind of happen in progression. You wouldn't do all this at once. You'd come back and add the estimate later, because I'm going to show you how to do a ballpark estimate first in one of these video tutorials. So here we've got this project, and this view is called All Projects by Category. So this is every project that is in the base, and it's sorted by this category of residential new construction, residential remodel, and so on. Then we have other views of the exact same data. So here we've just filtered it some and said, I don't want to see all the projects, I just want to see the incomplete projects, the projects that are in process. Or I want to just see the ones that have been completed. And so all we're doing is using a filter here and saying I only want to see the ones that have the completed checkbox checked versus the ones that don't have that checkbox checked for the incomplete projects. And this is probably one of the original purposes for me creating this in the first place, and what I did early on in Asana. Then I switched to Trello, and then I switched back to Asana, and now I've migrated all this to Airtable because Airtable is so much stronger than those other products. So here's our production status, and this is where we actually, for the shop employees, would assign them a column or two or three. And so when you put a project into a column, it's their job to get it out of the column. So this is a great production status, and I used this at a printing company. I used it in my own cabinet company for a couple years, and then I used it in a printing company, and it really helped to know where are things backing up. This becomes a great theory of constraints tool to see where things are backing up. If this column's got 13 jobs in it and none of these others have but one or two, then you know that we need to focus our attention on estimates, or we need to focus our attention on proposals or machining or assembly or wherever the jobs are backed up at. And these are all just made up jobs, so there's no rhyme to reason to any of this, and all the dates you can see are old dates because I have created this over time. But when the estimate is completed, and this is the job we'll be working on throughout this video series, when the estimate is completed and we've given the customer the estimate, then all we have to do is physically slide it over into this column. When we did that, now we can click on this and get to that form view, but when we slid it over into this column, these columns are based on the status of the job. And so this proposal, when we went from, or in this project, we went from estimate to design, it was the status field that we changed when we did that. We could also change it from here. We could come in here and say that we want this to go back to estimate, and you'll see it move back. So we can do it in either place. But for employees on the shop floor that are probably doing this on an iPad or a phone, this sliding motion really makes a lot of sense to be able to slide these over. And this is the only interface that the guys on the shop floor need to look at. Now, prior to doing this, you might be working in the company's database and on a view called Sales Pipeline. So this is that same Kanban view. We're looking at it in these cards, and we're trying to push everything in both of these Kanban views from the far left to the right. Everything needs to be moving. So for your employees in the production view, when something comes into their column, it's their job to get it out as quickly as possible, but they can also see when things are backing up. And in this one, we're trying to move customers from being, and I'm going to just explain this very quickly. This is going to be a little bit longer video tutorial than most because I need to get this entire overview in one single video, not break it up into multiples. So my thoughts on this are that there's people out there that have no idea that you exist. They're not aware of your company. So at best, they could be considered a suspect, but it's a builder or a remodeler or a homeowner or somebody building a house that doesn't know you exist. So that's these people here. You put those companies or people into this column by choosing that status. And then there's prospects as opposed to a suspect, and you can use any word you want. The objective being to move them from somebody who doesn't know you exist to somebody that's buying cabinets from you. And we need to have a process to do that. And so a prospect is somebody that's aware of you. Maybe you're a member of the Home Builders Association, so they've met you and they know you exist, but you don't know if they have a need. And of course, on a builder, usually you do. They always need cabinets. It's whether they're going to buy it from you or someone else. And then a qualified person, so a builder would probably go straight from suspect to qualified. They would never fall into this category, and same with a remodeler, but a homeowner might not. You may suspect someone might need some cabinets, or somebody might pass you a prospect what they would call a prospect. But if they don't know you exist and you're not certain that they have a need for cabinetry, then they would go into this column until you determine that they did need some cabinetry. So a qualified prospect is somebody who knows you exist and they need cabinets. And then you have your ballpark estimate. So that's the first thing I always do, is provide someone with not only a ballpark estimate but a range. So I give them 3 numbers, and I'll show you how that works in this video tutorial in just a few minutes. And then once you've given them that ballpark estimate, some things need to happen between here and here, but the next step would be if they say, yes, I can afford that, or yes, if as long as it falls in that range, we're good. This is like a pre-qualifying step. I don't want to use custom cabinet estimator software, put all this information in if they simply can't afford my cabinetry, or if they have some date that I can't make. I want to pre-qualify the people, and so this ballpark estimate is real down and dirty number, and it's actually 3 numbers, a low, a medium, and a high, based off past history, and I'll show you how we do that here in just a few minutes. But once we've done that, then we want to actually, if they agree that they can afford your product and the timeline is realistic, then we want to push them to the quoted category as soon as we've entered all their information into Custom Cabinet Estimator and given them an accurate quote. And then once they've agreed to that, again, it's not perfect because you've never been to their house and measured. Usually, at least that's the way I did it. I wouldn't field measure it until I had a signed estimate saying, if it turns out to be this, based off of your blueprint or sketches or pictures or drawings, whatever you can provide me with, if it turns out to be exactly like that, the quote will just be converted to a proposal with no changes. But typically, things change when you actually go out and field measure, and customers typically change things. But then you would move to the next stage of proposed. We're trying to get them to become a customer. Once they sign that proposal, they're a customer. And then the manufacturing portion is that production schedule we were looking at earlier. So that's a really valuable part of this tool, is this view, sales pipeline, on this companies tab. And you might want to put yours in the contacts tab, and I'm glad to help you do that if you prefer that. Typically there's a company of some sort involved, and you don't really have to have a company. We would actually have an entity in here called homeowner, that the homeowner was the builder. Homeowner Brown, Homeowner Smith, Homeowner Jones, that they served both purposes. They were a contact and the entity that was building the house. Doesn't happen that often. Usually there's some sort of builder or remodeler involved. So the second tab here that we skipped past is where we actually enter our rooms. So we have a job, in this case the one we're working on is here down at the bottom, and it's called Princess Bride Enterprises, and our builder is the Dread Pirate Roberts, and our first room is called Dungeon, but I might have 3 or 4 rooms, and I do for some of these, like this one has kitchen, laundry, and master bath. But this is where we actually make the selection. So we're meeting with them in the showroom, or maybe even at their home. I never did that. I always wanted people to meet in my showroom. But wherever you're meeting them, you could even do this on an iPad or a phone or a tablet, whatever. But you're making those selections that need to be made in Custom Cabinet Estimator instead of handwriting them on a form. Typically, you're not going to have your computer out and be entering stuff into something like Custom Cabinet Estimator. That's an exercise in, at the very least, it's an opportunity for mistake. And so I always did it on a form until I had something like this. These are just pull down fields, and you're picking from your available species. If it's not here, again, you just type it and it adds it to the list, and it'll be there from then on. Then you have your door models, and you're picking again from a pull down list, and if it's not there, you add it in. So this is the selections, and these selections are room specific. You can see here again, this job has 3 rooms, and the selections are different for the different rooms. So this is where you would make your selection process, and this is the main view grouped by project, maybe the only view you would come to when you're working in your office, not with a customer. You might choose, if you're working in the showroom or in their home, to use the form view. So here it just kind of walks you through field by field, and that's a nice way to do it. I'm in this room, I'm going to come in here and I start answering these questions here. Who's the designer? What room am I working on? And again, you can add any more rooms that aren't there. So this is a good way to do it, especially if you have an employee do it for you. Maybe your office manager or a designer or even a shop employee might need to do this for you sometime. This is a good way to keep them on the straight and narrow, a little easier to force them through this process rather than this grid view. I prefer the grid view, but you can use the form view. You can also share this form view. You can come here to this form view and share it. There's a share option on everything. And when you click on this, you get this little URL here, and you can share that via email or even on your website with someone, and then they can see this themselves, the homeowner, if you wanted them to. You may not want to do that, but you could if you wanted to. And that's a valid way to collect information, especially if you've done, maybe you had 10 rooms and you got 8 done at your meeting, and then you ran out of time and you say, hey, I need you to make those selections for those last 2 rooms if you don't mind. You share that with them, and they can go in there and kind of monkey see, monkey do what you did in the showroom and do it themselves rather than you having to have another meeting with them necessarily. So we kind of looked at these companies, And there's not any other views here of value for contacts, but here we do have this sales pipeline. I don't know that this next step is necessarily a view that is valid, but you can create dozens and dozens of views of any of these types. So calendar view, form view, Kanban view, block view, gallery, grid, whatever view makes sense to you, but it's all the same data, just displayed in different ways. And so then for contacts, I do think this is the only view it is, and it's just the people's contact information is all it is. It's a good place to collect it, to put it somewhere else. Ultimately, it might end up in QuickBooks and in the Custom Cabinet Estimator, or even into your Google Contacts. And then here we have our estimate tab. So we've got several views here. It's the one you're going to land on typically, unless you stay here all the time, but you usually want to be in this grouped by project. You don't really want to look at all of them at once. And so here we have them grouped by project for this ballpark estimate. And ballpark estimate is going to be based on two numbers. One is going to come from this rates tab we'll look at in just a second, and the other is going to be your estimated quantity of cabinets. Now if you build face frame cabinets and you do joined or merged cabinets, that's fine that you do that. Just think of them, if you've got a sink cabinet joined to a 3-drawer stack, that's 2 cabinets. That's how you would need to enter it into Custom Cabinet Estimator. We need to accommodate for the quantity of cabinets because that's the number we're going to use as our average number. And so it's pulling these numbers, this rate low, rate average, and rate high from past history, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But right now, it's taking that number that we said, okay, there's going to be 23 cabinets in this room, and the best case scenario is those cabinets are going to be $650 each. They're going to use maybe a white melamine Zargan drawer, decorative laminate veneer doors and drawers kind of thing. So it's $14,950. Typically, if you took all the jobs we did in a year and divided them total dollars by the total number of cabinets, it's going to be around that $850 mark. So that job is going to cost them $19,550. And if they want the best of the best of the best with all the accessories and stained glazed, distressed, antiqued, all of those things, it's probably going to be more like this $1,500 per cabinet, so $34,500. Again, we're giving them a range, so somewhere from this lowest number to this highest number is where it's going to fall. And what I've found with this, and I've explained this in my effective estimating seminars, and I've explained it to lots of people over the phone, that if I gave people 3 estimates, many people felt like they had done their due diligence. They're supposed to get 3 estimates. They got 3 estimates. Probably, if anybody ever told them what the rules were, you should get 3 estimates from 3 people. But they just know they're supposed to get 3 estimates. And if you give it to them, you retain a lot of people that never go get any more estimates. That was cool when I started doing that. The second part of it is a lot of people will come in and make their selections, and you'll give them an estimate, and they can't afford it. Instead of coming back to you and saying, I can't afford what I picked, they just go on to another shop and pick less expensive things. But they never give you another chance. If I give them these 3 numbers, they know that I've got this less expensive option if they can't afford what they chose. So that's a really valid thing. And then this high number, a lot of people would upgrade when they'd say, well, the difference is $19,000 to $34,000. I probably could go 24, thinking, oh, what can I get for 24? Where they're not even thinking about that if they're thinking this is what they picked and something else might be $75,000. This is like the best of the best. I probably could afford more than I've got though. So I had a lot of people upgrade when I started giving this range. But this is really quick and down and dirty. All you need to know is some sort of cabinet quantity, and again it becomes more and more accurate as you go through time entering these things. Now that we've looked at this, one of the things we can use here that's pretty useful to actually do the actual estimate is to gather your linear footage. So if you're using Custom Cabinet Estimator, you would use this area here to gather that footage, whether you're pulling it off of a blueprint. Again, I used to do this on a paper form so that later I could put it into Custom Cabinet Estimator quickly. But you just come in here and add your base linear footage, then base linear footage with finished interior, upper linear footage, and this is room specific. We see here we got 2 rooms, and we would enter those footages into these fields so that when we got to the point of doing Custom Cabinet Estimator, we could just be looking at this and looking at a particular project and be able to just pull it right off of there to enter into Custom Cabinet Estimator. So that's the point of this screen. Now those numbers we talked about earlier are here in this rates tab. Here's the numbers. And these are pretty much guesses based on what mine were years ago and just kind of playing with these fake projects. But when you're on this proposal tab, this is the real deal, and it's something you're entering based off of what comes out of Custom Cabinet Estimator. So this should be a correct, or this is actually our estimated, so this is a lookup field. When we looked at these types of fields earlier, one of the fields we didn't see on that first screen was this lookup field. So if you see the magnifying glass looking at the tall hamburger, then at that point it's a lookup field. So it's looking back back at our estimated cabinet quantity, and then we're saying, but what was the real cabinet quantity? And you can compare them, and in this case you see there is a little bit of variation in a couple of them. And this was our estimated dollars, again another lookup field looking back at this estimate tab, and then our proposal, so we're always seeing the difference in our numbers. And then we have this per cabinet cost that's based off how many cabinets were there and what was the proposed cost. And of course you get a lot of jobs in here. This number down here becomes really accurate, and so you can get those three numbers from right here, especially if you have a year's worth of work. But this will just go on forever, so it really becomes an aggregate of all of your jobs forever, although you can use your filter and say I only want to look at them for the past year so that you're not factoring in other years. But right here, if we come down to this field, this is an aggregate of these numbers, and we've said we want an average, but we could also say that we want a sum, which wouldn't make sense on that. It wouldn't be anything of value, the cost per cabinet. But we could say we want the minimum, the least, the smallest number of the three, and if there were 100, it would be the smallest number of 100, or you can say you want the max, the biggest number. And so you can see how you can get those three numbers to feed this rates calculation from right here. And of course I usually leave it set to average and kind of keep my eye on it. As you're adding jobs, it's a great aggregate of that average number of all your jobs. So this is a really, really powerful screen to use here. This one is just you fill it in once a year and don't mess with it typically. I wouldn't. Once a year was adequate for me. These are just fields that have been added by the first user of this for his own benefit. So he's buying from Cabinotch. As most of you know, I worked for Cabinotch for 3.25 years, something like that, 3.5 years. And he's buying his cabinet components from Cabinotch, and he's buying his doors and drawers from Conestoga. And this is like an operations manual. So it's like his step-by-step process of how does he place an order with Cabinotch. And so he's walking through here, and then as you're doing it, you can just come in here and say, okay, I've done that. And if you get distracted, you know when you come back what you've done. Okay, now I've done that. And then when you get done, let's say you come down, you've got them all checked. You can come up here and uncheck this one, and you see this little bitty, see how it turns into a cross right there in the corner. If I pull that down, it unchecks all of them. So it's just like a checkbox so that I don't get distracted from a phone call or somebody coming in my office. And then the same thing for Connex, ordering doors and applied ends and moldings and all of that. These are just step-by-step instructions, just like an operations manual. And even, I think it's here, yeah, you can have these images. You can see the image real quick. Hey, I need to keep these prices close by or something like that. Any images or anything that you put into these attachments you can get to. If it's a Word document or a PDF or any of that, you can pop in there and get it. So that's how this thing works. We've covered all of the tabs. We don't have any other views for these because they are just a step-by-step. Rates doesn't have any other views. Proposals just has the main view and then the proposals view. So all versus just the ones that are actually, see, these are complete end proposals. If we go to this view, it's just the ones that are at the proposal stage of the job. And then you got your estimates. And again, we've covered really everything I wanted to cover there. The estimate repository, I did miss that part. Let me go back to that. So back on that estimate tab, I do want to hit on this. This is where I would deliver my estimates. So I would come in here to my actual estimates grouped by project, and I would actually put my estimate in here. And so here's my estimate for this project, and I can invite the homeowner into this if I want to. And again, they're going to see a lot of things you might have. We'll think through that together. We may decide what we want to do for that. Right now, if we invite somebody in using the share button, they can see everything. But we can also do these views. So we might want to create a job specific view first, where all they see, and like in this case, it would be job specific because we only have one job at this estimate stage currently. So they would come in here, and this is all they would see is their estimate. And so we could do that too, and I can show you how to do that. This is a really complex app because of formulas. Formulas is where it gets its power. And I won't belabor this. I'll just real quick click on one just to show you. So here's where the formulas live, and this is a pretty simplistic formula. So the type of field this is a formula. And this formula is saying what is the actual estimate, this column right here, what's that number, divided by the actual cabinet quantity, which is this column right here. So we're taking this column and dividing it by that column, and it's giving us this number. So the formulas are really powerful. Even this field here is a formula. So if we click on it, now this is a really simplistic formula in that all it's saying is that it's a link to the rooms. So it's just looking at this rooms tab and pulling it over. That's all that formula is doing. But if we look at the same thing in our primary all products category, we see this is also a formula. So you can't type in that field. You got to come over here and type in some fields, or go to that form value and type in something, this gets filled in as a byproduct. But if we look at this formula, we see that basically what it's doing is it's taking the link to companies. So the first thing we see is the company name, and then we're putting in a space and the pike mark and then a space, and then we're saying link to contacts. So there it is. Link to companies, link to contacts, and it displays that name. So you can't type over it because it's a formula, but it's the result of choosing Atkinson Construction as the company and Henry Standing Bear as the contact, and then this fills in from that. So if we were actually filling this project in, we would come in here and we wouldn't type in this field, the very first field, because it's a formula, but we would come down here and link to a company, and we have, and link to a contact, and then this would fill in as the byproduct of having done that. So that's an overview of how this works. Again, I really think you need to have one-on-one to get really good at this, but this is a very powerful tool to make more money now and in the future. That's it for this overview video tutorial on the True32 Project Tracker template. Next, we will look at adding a project. Thanks for watching.